For the Pacifica Radio Network, welcome to Planet Waves FM. My name is Eric Francis, your host for the next hour or so. Today's edition is for Tuesday, June 14th, 2016. Welcome to our program, wherever you may be in the world or in the future. It is good to be with you. Today, of course, we are going to look at the incident down in Orlando that took place early Sunday morning. But I'm planning to look at this from a few different angles, one of which is going to be the astrology. I did some of that, by the way, in the current edition of Planet Waves TV. That's where I've got the most succinct, I would say, explanation of the astrology. I'm probably not going to go into that much detail here, but I will summarize it because I have other things I want to talk about, including the impact of violence in our society as it flows through electronic media. We've all been listening to me rant on and on about Marshall McLuhan's theories of media and how it extends the senses. And when we have an event like this, we are basically all responding in an astonishingly enhanced environment. In other words, our eyes and ears and so forth go straight down to the crime scene, and if we don't have enough video footage from inside the incident, we're disappointed in some way. And so it is in this environment of extreme extension that we experience this shock to our sensibilities, but there is a purpose that shock serves to us, and that's the main thing that I want to talk about. In a few minutes, when I'm done with this opening segment, I will talk about the current astrology and a little bit about what's coming up the next couple of weeks as Mars gets ready to station direct. And now I want to tell you about my class on Saturday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time called The Astrology of Now. This is a different kind of astrology class, one where we're not going to talk about the technique of doing counseling, but rather the technique of using astrology to find yourself in the moment and to get vital information about your environment, to place yourself in space and time and to gain some, not insight, but some actual traction in the, let's say, psychic and physical environment that you find yourself, so that you can wake up and make better decisions. Enrollment for that class is still open. I will leave contact information on the planetwaves.net and planetwaves.fm pages. And hey, if you're listening to this on YouTube, I'll make sure that we put a link to the class up on YouTube as well. The Gemini reading is still available. It's a juicy, beautiful thing in both audio and video, and fairly shortly, I think next week, right around the time of the northern solstice, I'll be recording the reading for the sign Cancer. These are magnificent readings. You would not really expect to be as good as they are, because it's not a natal chart reading, but it is another kind of astrology. This whole astrology of now thing that I'm talking about in my class, that really is my specialty. It's true, I've read thousands of natal charts, and I consider myself to be pretty good at it and teaching how to read natal charts also. I've got my ways. But there is something beautiful about working with the astrology of the moment and presenting that in a way that opens up your options and is motivating. And that is my specialty, my actual specialty, I think, as an astrologer, is pushing those doors open and helping you find your way, helping you orient yourself in a world that is confusing anyway, especially as we are so cut off from nature, and then in a time in history that is so confusing because we are so cut off from physical reality. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons I like to speak to you in this format. I understand that, it may seem like I don't have a body. But I am sitting here at my desk, a couple of stories above Kingston, New York, on a beautiful, sunny spring day, with a nice, heavy aircraft aluminum mechanical pencil in my hand, my favorite thing to write with these days, and my notes for the program taken on actual paper, though I'm not seeing more than 10 words on this page, so and about 5 astrological glyphs, so I'm going to pretty much wing this program for you. I usually do. Anyway, I'm not the type to plan so carefully, and these essays you read that I write every Thursday, I write them pretty fast, and thanks to a crack editorial team, they're fact-checked and scrubbed up and polished up and sent out to you in pretty darn good shape. And this program, I don't really edit it. If I say something really annoying or have a mad coughing fit, I don't think that's ever happened. I would cut that out. Anyway, here we are, and in these really intense, strange, confusing times, if you feel confused, my heart goes out to you. It is confusing right now, and part of the reason for this confusion is that we are living in the midst of a huge distortion. I'm going to get more into this, but it's partly described, the physical distortion and the kind of warping of space-time is described in the current astrology by the Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune T-square. So we have a very unusual astrological pattern right now. Now, these happen periodically from time to time, but it doesn't make them any less kind of overwhelming in that sly and subtle way. All astrology is what you might think of as background information. This is a pattern that, first of all, just assessing the gravity of it, we have basically the 3 largest planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, organized in a T pattern that's called a T-square. And so there's let's say there's a big missing piece on one side of what should be or could be a cross pattern. And when there is that big missing side, there can be this sense of an urgency to complete something. There can be the sense of things being out of balance, which they clearly are right now. There's very little actual balance in the world, whether we're talking about spiritually, psychologically, intellectually, whether we're talking about what is going on with ecosystems and soil systems, whether we're talking about the food that we eat, what we do with the course of our day, how much time we spend working, how expensive things are, how much effort we have to put in to earning a little money to keep going. And then there's all the multi-billionaires who kind of are vacuuming up vast amounts of money that I am a creative guy, and sometimes I try to imagine what anyone would do with it, and that's not the point at all. It's very much about having the illusion of power and the hedge against uncertainty, which of course only goes so far. And then you have a lot of people who are living on the brink of constant uncertainty, of not knowing anything at all for sure, not having any, let's say, material solid ground to stand on, not knowing where the next month's rent is coming from, not knowing where the next day's, opiate pain pills are coming from, not knowing where your next hug is coming from. And we seem to be going further and further out onto this edge. And there's a lot of pressure in this aspect pattern. And it's the kind of pressure that is, first of all, difficult to notice as such. It's almost like atmospheric pressure. I mean, it is a form of environmental pressure. And the tension of the Saturn-Jupiter square pattern is in itself enough to make everyone feel both lopsided and as if there is some urgent thing that we have to act on, right? The Jupiter-Saturn square, which happens, well, I'm never prepared to number crunch these cycles because I never quite know what I'm going to describe. Happens about twice every 20-year cycle of Saturn, and it is pushy in that it is associated with a sense of urgency. And in that, like, this is your last chance to do something. And in that pattern, exactly opposite Jupiter is Neptune. Neptune is invisible to the naked eye. It's one of the sly and subtle planetary influences. It tends to turn everything invisible and kind of push things below the level of liminality. I mean, that really is the role of Neptune, is to kind of, on one level, make things disappear and be out of the reach of the normal senses. And then the other thing that Neptune does is it provides a kind of a reservoir of creative energy to people who are tapped into it. And along with the first category of disappearance, you get a lot of the kind of blotto effect, the, drink till you black out effect. Not necessarily you probably don't do that, but it's popular. Neptune is associated with alcohol. It's kind of this liquid firewater substance. And I mean, have you ever imagined, probably not, but I have, all of the pubs and bars in the entire world? Like, let your mind stretch out all the way across North America and across the ocean and all the way across Europe and Eastern Europe and all of Asia and all the bars in Hong Kong and Taiwan and all over Japan and China, and think about how much alcohol is consumed in a single day. I would imagine it's got to be enough to fill up one of the Great Lakes. Where is it all coming from? And where is it all going? And what is the necessity to blank out consciousness? What is that need for anesthesia that is so prevalent? And if it's not alcohol, it can be any one of a number of things that sink consciousness below the level of liminality. In one sense, all electric media function as drugs. They all have a property that keeps one coming back for more. The more acclimated to them we become, the more invested in them we become. I personally would not want to indulge much in these things were I not able to sit here and provide some form of original response and feedback into the system. To me, the internet would be a harrowing place without a place to contribute, without a place to speak to you, to reach you in some way, without the reassurance that I know that I'm putting my vital force energy to work, and that you come here and hang out listening for a little bit of peace of mind, a little bit of reassurance, and perhaps another way of looking at or listening to the world. It would be a terrible place. The internet would be Siberia, as it was once called in a pretty famous book that came out in the mid-1990s that described this new environment. I forget the name of the author, but it should be a classic work, and I'm surprised I don't hear it mentioned that often. Have I ever mentioned the book Siberia, Cyberia? It came out right around the time that I was beginning the Planet Waves project, and somehow I got turned on to this book and read it and was pretty moved by it. And I understood from that the internet was a new environment and a new plane of reality. And the thing to be conscious of is the effect of numbing. It's this Neptunian effect of illusion and numbing. So what we've got in the planetary pattern right now is Saturn and Jupiter in a square. They're pretty tangible energies. You can see them in the sky. They're, close enough that we have a spaceship up on Saturn that sends us back stuff on a regular basis. Jupiter is pretty close to Mars, close to the asteroid belt, close to Earth. And they are in this pattern where it's like taking a corner too quickly. This sense that the car might tip over and the wheels are squeaking against the ground and there's G-force being pulled in other directions. But then there's Neptune that's kind of making it all seem okay, or making it all seem like it's not really happening, like it's kind of fogging over or let's say disappearing things, and it makes it that much more necessary to stay awake and tune in. And yet the more intense the environment gets, and by intense I mean now anyone vaguely near TV or the internet has for all day Sunday, all day Monday, we're now well into Tuesday, halfway into Tuesday, that's like 60 hours of exposure to the worst mass killing in the United States since the slaughter of the Native Americans, or so we're told. Add to that the level of questioning of what's true and what's not true, what was known and what wasn't known, and we have a serious situation on our hands because largely we are trying to navigate emotionally, psychically, spiritually, mentally, physically through an invisible environment. It's almost like being blind and deaf and trying to get through the world. And yet the blindness and the deafness are coming in the form of being overwhelmed by sensory data rather than having sensory data cut off. It would be interesting to interview blind and deaf people to find out what their experience of life is like in this era. If you happen to know anyone who is sight or hearing deprived, please, and who they be interested in speaking to us in some way, please let me know. Of course, if they're deaf, we'd need to work with with some intermediary mode of communication, perhaps a sign language interpreter. But I would be curious to hear from people who can't see and or can't hear about what their experience of life is like right now, how they experience this sphere of constant overwhelm that we are so subjected to. Those of us who are sighted and can hear, we are numbed out by this stuff. And Neptune is a reminder of that numbing out, of that disappearing, of that drug-like quality, the anesthetization effect of what we're experiencing and how overwhelming life is. And it's necessary, I think, more than ever to do what we can do to stay awake and to pay attention. This is a spiritual quest of the highest order. It seems to dwarf all other times in known history because so much has changed so fast, and the concept of a self is being lost, and or perhaps is. And so when we do astrology, we are seeking self in a very gentle way, and the caution is remain sensitive. First of all, if you want to actually experience anything, you must make the choice to keep your portals open and your sensitivity on. Now, part of what we have with help with that is that a little bit further out in Pisces, off this square pattern, or depends on your technique of astrology. I mean, it's certainly in the signs. The signs involved, as I've said quite a few times, are the mutable signs, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces. A little bit further out in Pisces is Chiron. And Chiron is the influence that has the awareness-raising effect rather than the anesthesia effect. right? Neptune is very easy to tune out. It's not so easy to tune in with Neptune. There's all this uncertainty. There is the question of whether what you're feeling is real. We've all had the experience under the influence of substances of wondering what we said and felt, whatever it was, last night, the day before, under the influence of those substances, whether it was alcohol or passion or whatever it might have been, was a real thing. And with Chiron, we're constantly being kind of pinched and jabbed and called back into focus. And so Chiron has about another year and a half or so in Pisces. It arrived in 2010 for about 7.5, 8 year journey. And I would suggest, and I'll get into this more in my class on the Astrology of Now, that we really work with this opportunity with Chiron and Pisces, because it is providing a tap into the typically invisible environment, because it is focusing the otherwise unfocused energy of Pisces, and in particular of Neptune in Pisces, right? Pisces right now is substantially ramped up by the ruler of its own, modern ruler of its own sign in its sign. So we live in a time of a lot of Pisces. There's a lot of pleasure seeking and escapism that aren't necessarily called that. It's in times when there is so much pain and so much challenge, pleasure seeking seems like the most natural thing in the world. Because after all, things are so stressful. Everyone understands the need to, have a good time. And at the same time, it can easily happen that we lose track of everything else. And so Chiron is here to keep us focused, to allow a portal in consciousness, a thought pathway into the invisible world, and to keep us awake there. Chiron is very good at keeping people awake. I think that, after decades of working with Chiron, the raising of awareness as the essential element in healing, because we all know Chiron is about healing. But before Chiron gets involved in any healing process, as we might know it, it's primarily focused on the raising of awareness and the maintaining of awareness. So this is why Chiron is associated with healing process, with therapy process, and with healing in relationships. Now, there is another really important factor in the sky that's unique to our moment, which is that Mars is getting ready to station direct. There was so much, to say about Mars retrograde first in Sagittarius and then in Scorpio that someone actually complained. And then, I don't know where this was, and then someone said, I don't know, I think we need to hear more about this. So now you're going to hear some more about it. We're near the end of this process that began in mid-April, right? And Mars is retrograde the second least of all the planets. I think it's something like 10% of the time of total days, Mars is retrograde. So it goes retrograde every 6 months, but every 2 years. But the process drags out for a while. So the retrograde of Mars itself, I think, lasts about 72 days, right? So that's about a month and a half, right? So it's from mid-April to late June. And we are now at the end of the actual 72-day retrograde. There's approximately 2 weeks left to this. And so Mars is moving very slowly. I haven't looked at the daily motion table, but if it's not already there, pretty soon it's going to be moving at the pace of Pluto. And Pluto is a distant, somewhat alien energy that is typically not accessed, except its influence can be felt as impact, right? Typically, Pluto is the thing that we don't see coming. And it is also, I think, a potent force of evolution. I really dig this interpretation of Pluto that surfaces in the early 1980s. No, I'm not down with every last bit of the technique proffered by the kind of Pluto department, but the idea that Pluto represents a kind of an evolutionary journey, and when taken consciously, when raised from an unconscious process to a conscious process, is about growth, about evolution, and personal evolution and cultural evolution. Now we have Mars, a much more accessible energy, a much more tangible, close to home, right? It's Mars is just literally a stone's throw away. A ton of Mars rocks land on the Earth every year from some ancient impact. And so, it's possible to walk around on the Earth and find a little slab of Mars somewhere, like in Antarctica or someplace like this. And scientists do all kinds of work analyzing Mars. We've never had a mission come back from Mars. So the only Mars rocks that Earth scientists have ever seen are the ones that fell from the sky. It's freaky, isn't it? And so Mars is so close, it can throw a rock at us. And that's how close Mars is in consciousness. It is right there with us. It is the gas pedal, and it's desire, and it's God, he's cute, God, she's cute energy, right? I'm going to get that. I want that. Wow, what a beautiful electric guitar. I want that. There's Mars operating for you. And Mars is drive. It is motivation. Mars, by the way, is becoming scary as the astral effect of the internet takes hold, where any assertion can be seen as too much assertion. Any self-assertion can be experienced inwardly as potentially violent, and I think that the astralizing effect of the internet is to tamp down Mars and to influence people to be more timid. And now, because Mars is moving close to the speed of Pluto, planets get a lot of their impact by how slowly they move, right? We're now getting Mars in a special form. And Mars is in Scorpio. It's one of its two signs that it is the so-called ruling planet of. It's the night house. Scorpio is the night house, of course, of Mars, and Aries is the day house of Mars, as quoted in ancient astrology. And so we are being taken into the internal, introspective, emotional, hormonal desire aspect of Mars as Mars slows down. And we get a couple of weeks, we get really about a month now from now of this extraordinarily slow movement of Mars in Scorpio, because it's going to go slower and slower until the 29th arrives, when for approximately no time at all, Mars stations direct, meaning that it seems to stop in its relative motion toward the Earth, and then its longitude increases rather than decreases. And if you're looking at a normal astrology chart, it will look like it is not going anywhere for a day or two or three, maybe 4 days. But if you take the decimal places out to about 4 decimal places, you can see that clearly that moment of the end of the retrograde is actually an instantaneous change in relative direction to the Earth. And so for now, the next 2 weeks, we're going to continue interiorizing Mars and feeling Mars as an inward impulse. And then for the subsequent few weeks, Mars will gradually expand into consciousness. And what I would suggest as an astrologer, who likes to kind of trip out on these energies and to feel them and kind of ride them and really live them is that you take this interiorizing journey of Mars. You follow Mars in, basically, as they would say in some forms of therapy. Follow this energy in and see how deeply it can take you. Now, when we, in the next segment, look at the charts of the Orlando incident, we're going to get a look at one form of impact that this Mars station is having. And it is amazing how closely the profile of this guy, and I always blank the names, Omar Mateen is what he's being called, the purported shooter, and the scenario in his chart and the scenario at the Club Pulse in Orlando match this urgency of interiorizing and reckoning with desire. And for many, many reasons, the most recent of which is this astralizing, discarnating effect of the internet. We're all kind of living on the astral plane now, where it is like we're living in a shared dream. Why it is so vital to stay in touch with your desire nature. Your desire nature being how what you want makes you who you are. Let's take a song break, and bringing back today an old friend of Planet Waves FM. That would be Jimmy Be Free, and this song is called Stone House. Was Jimmy Be Free, or sometimes known as Jimmy Free. He changes it around. A little bit whom I met in the Portland, Oregon airport one day, and been loving his music ever since. You are listening to Planet Waves FM. We are associated with the Pacifica Radio Network and an organization called Planet Waves. Planet Waves is real people. We're not some figment of the astral plane. We are actually humans who work together, who do research, who write, who edit, who do our best to take care of you in a time of global transition, indeed, a time of global crisis. I come back here every week lovingly and dependably because I like to, and I am also energized and inspired by the fact that I know that people are going to come here to meet me, to listen to what I have to say and the music I have to offer, and to get a breath of sanity in this world. And we do all of this with your support, with your assistance, as members of the Planet Waves organization. You can get just about everything that we do for free. That is by design. The value proposition of Planet Waves is that we are here to do our bit for the world, and we love to do so artfully, and we do it without commercial interruption, which means that we do not have the investment, the control, the potential for manipulation, and just the general ugliness of advertising. And that is my gift to you, to preserve a kind of a psychically clear environment where everything is working together for one unified purpose. Our expression, your receiving, and in that light, the exchange that we have where we're able to provide you with resources as a consequence of, a direct result of your being a member of Planet Waves. So if you're listening and you are a member, thank you. Please do reach out to others that you know who appreciate Planet Waves. And if you're one of those folks who can't afford to sign up and you've thought about doing it a lot of times, now is a great time to do it. Get out your credit card or your debit card. If you don't like doing those things, call us up at 206-567-4455 and join the movement toward sanity, toward peace, toward the use of our media tools for a wholesome, loving purpose. That's what I'm doing here every day at this lovely desk, looking out over my lovely street with all of the amazing people that I work with. Okay, so we left off with Mars getting into kind of evolutionary mode. Mars moving really slowly and taking the physical, hormonal, impulsive level of desire and translating that into what is the sexual realm of Scorpio, the physical, hormonal realm of Scorpio. And Mars now is taking up its mission as a driver of confidence, actually, that's true, of awareness of your truly deepest needs and wants. And I would propose, speaking of confidence, that when you are real with yourself about your truly deepest needs and wants, that is when you will find your confidence. And if you're wondering where your confidence is, where it went, consider that possibility, that when you're real about what you want, you have more confidence. Deception in any form deprives confidence, deprives strength. And Mars is saying, be real, and especially be real about all of this Scorpio stuff. Now, working our way into the discussion of the Orlando shooting, there's an idea that I've been developing in the past few episodes of Planet Waves with the help of the McLuhan family and the ideas of Grandpa, Marshall McLuhan, one of our kind of patron saints at Planet Waves and someone I consider to be one of my spiritual grandfathers. And the idea that I'm working with right now is that electronic media have a de-physicalizing effect on people. All of them do it. All transmission of ideas that move at in non-physical form at the speed of light, starting with the telegraph in the early 1800s, change our perception of the body. And this really hits the bell curve with the development of TV and radio through the 1920s, 1930s, and then the supremacy of television in the 1950s and 1960s, and there is complete disorientation. Once I was little, and maybe I was about 3 or 4, and my dad, I don't think I've ever told this story before. I haven't even really thought of this. My father was on a show called Password, and it was a pre-recorded show, and we watched the show as a family, my mom and my dad and me, and my kid mind thought that I must have a TV daddy and a real life daddy, because there were 2 daddies. I did not understand this. I was not yet at the point where I could intellectualize the notion that there was a recording device of my dad and a physical one standing right in the room with me watching this. And it's kind of amazing to even have this memory, or to say it, that me, the person you're listening to, try to explain that split body phenomenon as there being 2 people. Now, if you can imagine that this kind of influence and effect is happening all the time, and the little kid mind in all of us is trying to figure out who is who and what is what, as we, first of all, project ourselves into this astral plane of electronic media pretty much all day and all night, and as it in turn swallows us, all of our activities, all consciousness, all communication, basically being subsumed by this low-level electric astral plane, the net effect is that we are being shorn of our bodies. But of course, we're still in body, or you couldn't hear this. So what the effect is really is a combination of an abandonment of body consciousness and a distortion of body awareness. So we're living in the midst of this huge, bizarre, ever-increasing distortion around physical existence, and it is extremely disorienting. It has caused upheavals in every facet of culture and of life, and we live with this kind of radical instability which roots back into the instability of what used to be the realm of individuality, has been completely violated by electronic media, and then ramp that up by a high exponent when you get us directly involved, typing into numerous platforms and reconstructing our identity over and over again. With every profile we post, we're making some attempt to reconstruct identity. And so it's as if there's no longer one of you, there's hundreds and hundreds of you. And this is something of an effect of Eris. This is, I think, really taking hold right at the time that Eris enters Aries. As an aside, the more I look into this, the freakier it becomes of this phase in the late 1920s when the first radio station is licensed, and that leads to every other radio station, when the first TV broadcast happens, and when the transistor, which becomes the computer, is patented. So right at that time, when Eris enters Aries, and as soon as it does that, in 2728, there is a conjunction of Eris by the planet Uranus. And now, so that kind of radically starts things off in terms of the actual age of electric mass media. And now Uranus has come one full cycle. 89 years have passed since that conjunction began in 1927. And now we are in the thick of the digital age, where this electric media is not only something that's shot at us, but it's something that we willingly jump into and participate in, and which is also no longer a thing that we might seek out, but something that is soaking us all the time, everywhere, if nothing else, in the form of microwave transmissions that are bathing our brains and our bodies in the very conducting medium of this stuff. So it's not so much the content of the internet or of TV or of radio that is shaping us, but it is the structure that is shaping us, and the effect of the structure is to take us out of body. And when we're taken out of body, our identity is completely scrambled. And when identity is completely scrambled, the next thing we're going to do is seek identity in some way. And one of the most, let's say, historically relevant ways that people seek identity is through violence and confrontation. And this includes violence on the level of actually doing violent acts and going to war and shooting people in foreign countries. And it also includes the day-to-day confrontations, the abrasions, the contacts, the kind of confrontations of daily life, whether they be intellectual confrontations or somebody screaming at you in a traffic jam, or vice versa. The extent of the litigious nature, particularly of American society, people attempting to, basically seek identity by suing someone, assert who they are against someone or something. And if you're wondering why there is so much violence in society, and not only that, why we seek it out so dependably and with such hunger, consider the possibility that it is a response to being destabilized by electronic media. We're shocked out of ourselves. The idea of a tangible self with a purpose and a meaning and an identity and a trajectory is more or less gone. And when it's not that it's not available, it's just that it's difficult to access. And this makes me concerned about so-called digital natives who've grown up in this environment of being shorn of tangible identity. The media that fosters that the best, by the way, is the book. It matters less what you read and more that you read. Of course, there's a huge qualitative difference, scale of distinction possible in the book, and of course, read what stretches you and what interests you. But the book is less and less of a factor, particularly among younger people. I have to ask young people now, do you read books? Can you read a book? It is harder and harder the younger people get to read a book. In some ways, it seems completely bizarre to read a book. Right? The idea you would sit there and read that whole book, and yet that book has a powerfully interiorizing effect, and the use of printed language on the page has a way of helping you distinguish yourself from your background, from the ground around you. The internet has exactly the opposite effect. Its effect is to blur the distinction between figure and background, to blur the distinction between you and your environment. It fosters group consciousness rather than individual consciousness, a kind of a corporate consciousness, and makes it difficult to know who you are and what you want. So, when people say that ISIL or ISIS, this Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, I think it is a product of the internet, what they mean is not merely that people are finding out about it on the internet, which they are, but that's the content aspect of it. What they really mean is that the internet is having a radically destabilizing effect on identity and consciousness and is rendering everything incoherent. And the result is the provocation to find oneself, therefore, and the easiest and most accessible way to find oneself is through violent provocation. And so we no longer live in a time when people stick out their thumb and hitchhike to California to find themselves, because after all, that's too dangerous. Instead, we live in a time when young people are drawn in some way to go to the war front in Iraq and Syria, or to fantasize about doing so, and in their imagination become a kind of a warrior. And so when we wonder, and sometimes to take it up, and so assuming the facts of the official story of what happened in Orlando over the weekend are vaguely true, what we have is a scenario of someone provoked to seek their identity through violence. Now, this works well in theory, right? It certainly fits. The theory fits what happened. But it's even freakier when we look at the charts. And for now, for this portion of the discussion, I'm going to follow the official line. So I'm not here to deconstruct the official line. I'm going to do a little bit of that, but I'm not going to get distracted by that, because I think the deconstruction is an effect of its own. There's something else going on with this kind of deconstruction of this, and the assumption that everything is fake. Because on one level, it doesn't matter whether what we're seeing really happened the way we're being told that it happened. We're being confronted by violence in the digital environment, in the broadcast, in the electrical environment. We are being confronted by bloodshed, by agony, and by an influence that is telling us over and over again that we are simply not safe being alive. Now remember something super duper, stick a couple of dupers and supers on there, important, which is that one of the very first effects of the electric media, the mass media in particular, we're not talking about telegraph here, and we're to some extent talking about light bulbs, but really the electronic mass media, is that it extends sensitivity. Right? You might not know about this were it not for the electronic media. And you heard about it hours after the fact because of instantaneous electronic communication. And so we live in a kind of a shared nervous system, where all of us are extending our nervous systems through the digital environment, through TV, through radio, through our telephones, through the internet, through every possible form of electronic communication, whatever it might be. We are extending our eyes, our ears, and our feelings, for example, even all the way to a crime scene in Orlando. I think the fact that this is about Orlando is a meaningful symbol in this also, because Orlando is a place everyone can relate to. Now, it's not Disney World. Disney World is some adjoining town to Orlando, but everyone has heard of Orlando and knows that Disney World is right there, and you fly into Orlando Airport when you're going to Disney World. So it is kind of like the capital of America in a way. I mean, does anybody take their kids to Washington, D.C. anymore to see the Supreme Court and the lotus flowers on the ceiling of the courtroom and to see the portraits and the whatever? Or do we go to Disney World? Is that the rite of passage now? I'm sure there's a couple of freaks listening to this on the car to Washington, D.C. The kids are laughing. Even the dog thinks it's funny. But for the most part, we go to Orlando. So Orlando is the sort of heart of the American experience. So when something happens there, we all recognize the place, and our senses extend even with greater sensitivity. And when there is a shock, the shock is transmitted through this extreme amplifier. And we receive the shock on our end of that amplifier. And I think that we are, first of all, shocked further out of body. And second, that the next thing that happens, it happens no matter what with the electric media, is that after we extend our senses and they become too hypersensitive, we cut off. This is the creation of the media zombie, of the like person in the iPhone haze, because it's such a great thing at first, and then it's too much. And talk about too much. I mean, a scene in a nightclub of a crazy guy shooting up the whole place. Right? Who can't relate to those people, to those faces that they're seeing, and the stories and the grieving parents? But what we're not really thinking of is the influence that this impact has, this profound impact that it has. I was looking up videos of Professor McLuhan speaking in the 60s about violence and identity. His son, Eric, reminded me of that this week, and said, well, when you're analyzing violence as a kind of a phenomenon, remember that identity is formed through confrontation, and that people seek violence, and so, for the purpose of forming identity. And so in an environment where people are destabilized and where their identity is fogged over or anonymized in some way, that the hunger for violence and the need for violence, the craving for violence, will increase. And if you're wondering why we live in an immediate environment of ever increasing violent movies, more and more and more, just for its own sake, it is a kind of vicarious seeking of self-identity. And so when an event like this happens in Orlando, attention is riveted to it. And there's a reason for that. And the reason that is that it's an attempt to fulfill something missing. And I have noticed this need not only to be told the facts, but disappointment that there's not actual video of what was actually happening inside this place for nearly 3 hours of what we are told is a mass kill and a hostage situation, followed by complete pandemonium. And it is not really helping the seeking of identity, right? It's not a real confrontation. As transmitted by internet, it is very much a virtual reality. It is a virtual confrontation. The hunger is there, but it's a little bit like the hunger for sex being attempted to be fulfilled by porn. It's not the same thing. You're getting a fantasy version, and it can be really good fantasy version. I am an erotic artist. I love the depiction of erotic scenes and subtle erotic mental states. But it's not the same thing. It's a little better if you're the artist, if you're the person doing the depiction or doing the action. It's much more physical. But to be on the receiving end has an unfulfilling quality to it that leaves you hungry for more. And that is the same effect of being confronted by these huge, virtual, violent scenarios. And they are fueled by the previously existing fact of being shocked out of your body. Now, I was telling the story of looking for the videos by Grandpa, and I found one where he said, think of it this way. The effects of new media as they are introduced are not considered. They are just not considered. They are no more considered than what a fighter pilot swooping into somewhere and dropping bombs on the ground actually considers the actual effects of what he is doing. On some level, they know that they're dropping bombs on populations, but the actual effects on the ground are cut off from awareness. You can't see them or feel them in the cockpit. You can't really be aware of the actual pain that you're causing, because otherwise you probably, first of all, would be in so upset you couldn't fly the airplane. And what Professor McLuhan said was, this is the same thing that the purveyors of new technology do to civilian populations when they drop on us a thing like the Sony Walkman, like television, like radio, like AOL, like the internet in every form. We are merely being bombed, and no one is considering the effect of that bombing run. Only we're sitting here on the ground being bombed by it, and there are some people who are suspect of this, and they tend to shun the new media or use it cautiously, use it carefully, use it judiciously for less of the time. But nonetheless, they are in the midst of the civilian population being bombed by the new technological developments. And then the bombing gets really serious when they tell us that there have been 50 people, 49 people killed, and 53 people severely wounded in a nightclub in a place everyone loves. Kind of got clued into the kind of fantasy of Orlando when I saw Book of Mormon a couple of weeks ago. I don't think I mentioned I saw that, but I wanted to see that for a while, and I'm a great fan of Trey Parker. I think one of the smartest people around, and there's a whole joke in Book of Mormon, because the one Mormon kid, the male lead, or one of the two male leads, wants to go to Orlando. He wants to be a Mormon working in Orlando, knocking on doors, and instead he gets sent to Uganda to convert Africans in a place where there's AIDS and maggots growing out of people's bodies and warlords and vaginal circumcision going on, and instead of getting sent to this beautifully mythical place called Orlando, he's sent to Uganda. And so Orlando has that "Isn't America Wonderful" flavor to it. And the shooting up of Orlando is the symbol that if Orlando isn't safe, nowhere is safe. Further shocking us out of our bodies. For example, in a world where you're not supposed to be safe anywhere, it would make sense that you walk around in a kind of a haze, that you walk around anesthetized, lest you be the victim of the latest mall shooting or school shooting or whatever shooting, nightclub shooting. Now, let's see, the last three, one was in a nightclub, one was in a party, and one was in another nightclub. Right? All the ones that happened in Paris were like social events, a soccer game, restaurants and so forth, and then a nightclub in Paris, where I've actually been. And then a party at a workplace. That was the one in San Bernardino. And then this one was in a social environment. So the theme has clearly shifted to mass kills in social environments, in social Paris, in what should be the safest place in the world, a luncheon at work. And how do you respond to that? Well, you have to numb out to respond to that. All right. With that as our backdrop, the understanding that what the influence of the internet is about turning us into discarnated astral beings. Let's hold that thought. Let's listen to Jimmy Be Free squeezing the violin strings on his sixth string. And this piece is called Inward. me be free. Inward, you are listening to Planet Waves FM, part of the Pacifica Radio Network, proudly part of the Pacifica Radio Network, published by a little nonprofit organization, that's us, called Chiron Return Incorporated. Again, more on that another time. That's the nonprofit arm of Planet Waves that has taken over Planet Waves FM and is now embarking on its mission of developing a way of training journalists and broadcasters through actual practical experience. If that includes you, someone might be interested in that, write to me, 845, no wait, right, EFC at ericfrancis.com. My phone number is all over the place too. It's pretty easy to find that. But EFC at ericfrancis.com. We're supported by your memberships to Planet Waves. It feels good to be a member of Planet Waves. I am aware that there are many things that you can be a member of, being slightly higher on the food chain than most, but also being a direct participant in the internet. I like to support a good few things, and even if you only do a small membership or a one-time purchase, one-time donation, what we do is designed to be of authentic, actual help. And I'm going to continue doing that as best I can in this discussion. Now, what I want to do in this third segment, and I'm going to take this as long as I need to, because you're always free to tune out or to tune back in later, is I want to look at the charts for the event in Orlando and put them around the chart for the shooter, the purported single lone wolf conspirator. Now, I have questions about this that have surfaced over the past few days since I did Planet Waves TV, and still I think there's something that is remarkable about these charts in that they so beautifully fit the scenario. So the reason that I initially said that this does not look like a hoax or a false flag incident. A false flag incident is something that's called something other than it is, or where the term originates is that there's an attack and a different country is blamed, hence false flag. The flag of the country is not the real flag that did this. So it's a little like, the United States bombs somebody and blames somebody else for doing it. That's a false flag incident. Or that's a good one. That's the best way to put it, and it's usually the kind that happens. So when I cast these charts for any event like this, and I've done lots and lots of them. The first one where I really dug in was TWA Flight 800, and that was back at sort of the beginning of my career. Work with David Arner, one of my favorite people, and started to get the feeling of news astrology doing that particular chart. And by the way, David's interpretation was right. He took one look at it. He said, Neptune's rising. The Navy did it. We'll never know the truth. So I look at the chart for an event like this, and my first question is, does this chart fit the scenario of what appears to have happened? For example, we're being told there's a mass shooting. Does this look in any way like the chart of a mass shooting of any kind? We're told it was in a public place. Does it look like a chart in a public place? We're told that there was a certain perpetrator. Does the apparent perpetrator match? Now, this is not science. This is interpretation. This is kind of a thought experiment. And yet it can be helpful because it sparks the creative mind, and it kind of gets the inner debate going and an evaluation process, and it calls forth the kind of deeper analytical skills, right? To read the chart of something, it helps if you really think about what you're doing. Right? What else would you do? I mean, there's other ways to do astrology. You can just follow the choreography of astrology, or you can think about it. And so what I saw was a match. It looked remarkably similar. I'll give you an example. The first thing that is apparent from the chart of this 2:02 a.m. incident, and by the way, I just want to correct that the posting to the Pulse Orlando Facebook page apparently happened well past 2 a.m., and that there are documented reports of the first shot being fired at 2:02. That is extraordinary in that 2:02 a.m. produces a genuinely extraordinary chart. I've mentioned the Aries point a lot, and that is the first degree of Aries, and I have said many times that it also includes the first degree of the other cardinal signs, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And when you cast a chart for Orlando, Florida, on the morning of June 12, 2016 at 2:02 a.m. daylight time, you come up with a chart for 10 arc minutes Aries rising. If that chart had been cast for 30 seconds sooner, that is to say 2:01:30, you would have a chart with 29 degrees and 50-ish arc minutes Pisces rising. A very different chart. To have the last degree of the mutable signs or the first degree of the cardinal signs. And what is extraordinary, even more so about this chart, is that all 4 cardinal points align with the angles. Florida is fairly close to the equator. We are fairly close to the northern solstice, so there is some enhanced symmetry in the sky right now. And when you cast the chart for Orlando, you get Capricorn on the 10th, 6 arc minutes. 0 degrees total, 6 arc minutes Capricorn on the 10th, 6 arc minutes Cancer on the 4th, 10 arc minutes Libra on the 7th. You get what astrologers sometimes call a natural chart. All the cardinal points align with this chart. As Michael Elia, one of my, let's say, personal law professors and friend and co-astrologer, not pro-astrologer, but I have had great success in getting some of the most brilliant assertions about astrology from the non-professional astrologers, from the hobby astrologers who probably go slower and spend more time thinking about things. But plus, he's read a little bit of Planet Waves. He said, I think, just saying, that to have the 4 cardinal points aligned with the mundane angles of this chart is that this is the start of something and not the end of something. And I would agree with that analysis. So straight away, we get the chart of a huge event. We get the chart of something that is likely to have a greater influence on more people than we have seen recently. And by Sunday, they were calling this the biggest mass shooting in American history. Again, if you do not count the assassination of the slaying of millions of native people who were here before the white man arrived. So in modern history, in the history of shootings from university towers and army bases and every place else and so forth, this is the most number of casualties in American history. That alone speaks to its impact and its size and its scale. With a horary chart like this is kind of an event chart, but I use the rules of what is called horary astrology, the astrology of a question. Shouldn't I or shouldn't I? What is the nature of this situation? And I do take those cases. You read with the rules of horary. And so when we do that, the first thing we check is the ruler of the first house being the question and the actor, and the ruler of the 8th house in a death chart being the cause of death. And they both turn up Mars in the 8th house retrograde in Scorpio. Scorpio is on the cusp of the 8th, the house of sex, death, money, power. It is in the sign Scorpio with similar themes, only they're more grounded and physical in Scorpio. Mars is retrograde. It is, let's say, severely turned inward on itself in its environment, which is a sexual environment. And so we're told that the death took place in a sexual environment, namely a gay bar. Gay bars are not places where people have sex generally, but maybe, hopefully, somewhere. But it is an environment where sexual identity is expressed, where people meet partners, and where they go to be among their kind and party. And my initial take on this was that there was somebody involved questioning their sexual identity who shot up a gay bar. Turns out that's what the chart says, because it's talking about the ruler of the first and the ruler of the eighth, Mars, the planet of death and sex, initiative, and violence through seeking identity. Interesting take on Aries being the first house, associated with the first house of astrology is that we seek identity through violence. This deserves a whole program. Maybe I can get one of the McLuhans on talking about this. And in this program, we should talk about the Thema Mundi, which has the sign Cancer rising. In any event, we get a symbol of an actor in a sexual environment, and the death is related to sex. Second, we have Saturn in Sag, retrograde, in the ninth house. This is an image of religious oppression. So way back at the beginning of Mars retrograde, when we're talking about Mars retrograding from Sagittarius through into Scorpio, if anyone remembers, I know the spring reading seems like a fucking eon ago. Still there for you, by the way, 12 video readings. I talked a lot about the relationship of sex and spirituality and religion. And we live in this world where the dominant philosophy is that if something is sexual, it cannot be spiritual. And if something is spiritual, it cannot be sexual. And when something is made to be or seem both sexual and spiritual, it either seems really taboo or really exotic or really strange, because you don't really do that, right? You fuck to fuck and you pray to pray, and twain the two shall meet. Well, it happens that Mars has been walking the line between this Sagittarian realm of belief and religion and spirituality and Scorpio, the nitty-gritty hormonal impulse and drive. And Saturn has been working the line also. Saturn went back and forth over this line from late 2014 into late 2015 as if it was kind of using that magic smear tool in Photoshop where you blur the blur tool, right? Remember that one? Where you blur the line between things and you kind of smudge things into each other. Well, first Saturn smudged the line between Scorpio and Sag for a year, and now Mars is smudging the line between Scorpio and Sag for a year, as if to say, hello, wake up to the fact that sex is existential. It's how we're born. We're all born either from a uterus or a uterus and a pussy. If you're C-section, you just get the uterus. If you're born through a vaginal birth, then you're born through a vagina and a vulva. There was a joke in the fourth grade, and fourth grade girls, in hindsight, are astounding. They were way ahead of me in the fourth grade. Fourth grade chick called Rosemary Tomasetti in Mrs. Fennelly's fourth grade class in a very prim and proper elementary school says to me, she walks up to me and says, "Do you ever have a cunt around your neck?" I'm 9. I said, "No." She says, "What, were you born through your mother's asshole?" This is the girl at the top of the class. Rosemary Tomasetti. Hi, Rosemary. If you're listening, that was a really funny joke. Now I get it. We're all born sexually. We're all conceived sexually. We're conceived from germ cells. The splitting of sex and spirituality is oppressive. I recommend you not be too proud of it. Heal this. Mars is helping us heal this. Saturn's helping us heal this. Everything right now is helping us heal this. There is a personal and a collective injury around this renting of separate erotic body feelings and so-called spiritual feelings. It is worth pointing out that one of the solutions to this is also to come out of body, to be more like the angels, to be high and spiritual and relate to life through your upper chakras instead of the mean, nasty, dirty lower chakras. And the internet is a kind of a journey out of the body. There was a philosopher called Heidegger. I'm not sure when he lived, I think in the 19th century. When did Heidegger live? Let's get that. It had to be the 19th century or early 20th. Probably spans both. Hold on. Let's see what old boy lived. Born in 1889, died in 1976. So kind of a modern guy. And Heidegger is quoted by the McLuhans in a book called The Laws of Media, which I'm just loving. And he proposed that the electric media is a path to God because it leads us out of our bodies. It makes us discarnate. It puts us up on the astral plane. There is a common belief in New Age religion and many other forms of spirituality that anything that gets us out of our bodies is more spiritual, because after all, it's closer to the realm of angels. Better to be out on the astral plane than on the physical plane. And this fits perfectly with the fundamentally Catholic view that the body is nasty and bad. It's Manichaeism, that old one that they stole. I can never pronounce that word. Maybe if I'd heard someone say it, I could pronounce it. That the world is divided into dark and light, and on the light side are the angels and goodness and prayer and blessing and spirituality and the Pope, and on the dark side is the body and cock and pussy and sex and fucking and shit and piss and feelings and hormones and desire. That's all the dark side. This is a false dichotomy. Heidegger kind of plays into this when he says, well, he figures out that the electric media is astralizing us. He says, this is good because it's the path to God. We're reaching in the direction of the angels at least. We're going in the right direction. Tantra teaches, get in your body. Stay there. Feel the feelings. The thing about the earth plane is you can get anywhere from here. All right, so back to this shooting. The fundamental construction of the chart is shooter, Omar, represented by Mars, retrograde in the 8th. Double significator, rules the 8th, Scorpio, rules the 1st, Aries, because it's a natural chart, i.e. Aries on the 1st. Cardinal points involved. This is about all of us. The personal is political. That's the message of the Aries point and the cardinal points. Who killed the Kennedys? After all, it was you and me. And said Mick, and the cardinal points aligning with this wheel, with the mundane angles of this moment in time, this rare, fleeting moment in time, aligning to within mere fractions of a degree, is saying that this is about all of us and it is about our total environment. Therefore, pay attention. Further, Saturn in Sag, retrograde, is the oppressive influence of religion, the concept of this is bad. Well, now we find out about this guy. Now, I admit, I don't know him personally. I can't verify these stories, but they're giving us a profile of a guy who not only was a kind of a radicalized pseudo-Muslim. Nothing Muslim about this, but he claimed to be one, and father is one. Not only shot up the gay club, but apparently frequented the place. And so he was having an identity crisis. And before I knew that he frequented Pulse, interesting name, I'm looking at a chart with a noon chart. We don't know what time he was born, but we do have a lot of planets in Scorpio. This sign of hormones and sex and death and putrefaction and growth and the flowers blooming from the rot of the previous thing that lived. And we have Venus conjunct Pluto, first of all, a really intense Venus conjunct Pluto, right? Because Venus is retrograde and it's conjunct Pluto, and this is lust turned inward on itself. This is potentially highly toxic. Furthermore, and it's not going to speak about the truth. It's Venus retrograde in Scorpio. It's going to be very secretive about its feelings. Mercury is also retrograde in Scorpio. Mercury is, in a similar sense, going to be highly sexed, but silent about it. Retrograding into Ceres, a planet associated with mother and with nourishment. And so he's got some intense eroticism. He's got some identification or feelings with his mother. He's got some female thing going on. He's like one of these depicted as machoer than macho guys. He's a security guard, and he's the pictures of him show this intense sort of like manly man, who wouldn't be seen with pink nail polish as long as he lived. But he's not feeling that on the inside. He's feeling very pink nail polish on the inside. Feeling very, let's say, there's something about being penetrated here with Venus retrograde conjunct Pluto. I would imagine if I had this chart, I'd be wondering what it was like to be fucked. Furthermore, he's born at the full moon. In fact, if we cast a chart for noon, which I've done, he's born hours away from the full moon. It's just happened. And this is the extreme polarization that they're talking about, bipolar and abusive. Now, not everyone born at the full moon is bipolar or abusive. But if other factors, both environmental and astrological, feed that, then there's an issue. Right? Then it can manifest in a kind of a polarized way. Now, people do brilliantly with the full moon. It can work like a battery. It can be have a lot of energy and be highly charged up. But when it's not working so good, when it's not manifesting in a friendly way at all, it can be harrowing, and it can be bipolar. And anyone with the full moon knows they've got that kind of lunar tendency, that they follow the cycles of the moon, and they have that kind of am I my sun or am I my moon type of thing going on. And it turns out that both sun and moon are square Mars, 90 degrees away. Let's look in particular at the sun square Mars. It's got sun at 2403 Scorpio and Mars at 2343 Aquarius. Mars in Omar's chart is in Aquarius, and Mars stationing direct right now is conjunct his sun. In fact, at the time of the shooting, Mars was conjunct his sun to just over a degree and is retrograding back over that sun right now as we speak. So the Mars station direct takes place conjunct Omar's sun and square his Mars. So it's triggering his Mars-Sun square. And what's interesting is that he was personally provoked to do a mass killing in a gay environment or sexualized environment somehow with his Mars in Aquarius. It is violence against the collective. Again, not in every chart of Mars in Aquarius. But when you put all these other factors in and you add a trigger point and you add environmental things and you add the fact that this is basically a discarnated kid, a so-called digital native, basically. Digital age was well underway in 1986. PC and all that comes out in 1980. There's a crude, rudimentary internet. It's starting to happen. This is the result. So when initially I said, this looks real to me, it's because every factor fits. The story fits. Now, it also tells a larger story about us, and that is what makes this so interesting. It is not merely a chart for this one scenario. It is a story of our society. And part of that story is that we are discarnated by the internet and we are seeking identity as a result of that. It is very hard to seek sexual identity discarnated. It is much easier to feed it with violence. And to try to have some kind of a identity-seeking kind of hunger for the violence aspect of this, because we're trying to figure out who we are, and this confrontation dramatizes that. That's why we want to see inside the place, not just see the outside of the place. And I would suggest not being so disturbed by any of this. Just observe what is going on. You're far removed from it. And when you're in public, wherever that might be, walking to lunch or walking your dog or walking your cat or whatever you might be doing, when you go out, ask yourself if you feel safe. Do you feel safe? I am one of these people who is always studying the emergency exits. I will tell you, I've done this for a long time. I want to know where the exits are. In a group, I know how quickly things can go bad. Before the age of terrorism, and thankfully I've never been in a fire, but one of my habits is when I'm staying in a hotel is I always take the fire stairs down to the lobby. I do not take the elevator down except if I've got tons of baggage or I'm going with somebody. Almost all the time I go down the fire stairs. I want to know that they're there, that they're open, that they work, that they're safe, that they're clear. I've got a strong will to live, and I believe I'm in my body. I don't feel paranoid. I'm just situationally aware. How do you feel? Do you feel afraid? Do you worry when you're in public? Do you not worry in public? Do you comfortably get drunk in a public place? Good thing to ask yourself. And what's your contingency plan? What's your plan for if things don't go according to plan? I personally don't think that this really makes very many people feel any cognitively less safe in their immediate situational environment, but it feeds an underlying sense of numbness, of disconnection. That sense of numbness and disconnection can be very dangerous on the physical plane. The way we tend to deal with the numbness of disconnection on the physical plane is to disconnect more, a la why just be in a crowded nightclub when you can be in a crowded club blotto on alcohol, so such that you barely can find your credit card to pay for your drinks. Apparently a persistent problem, since there are laws about this. People getting too drunk to manage their physical bodies and their physical reality. To me, the much more interesting thing about this is the extent to which it describes our relationship to our sexual environment, which is a violent response to the lack of identity. And part of that lack of identity is a lack of sexual identity that is associated with this extend cut off with a complete scrambulation of self-concept by the internet and like not even really knowing how to have a conversation well enough to know that you actually know someone or understand someone, like a complete disconnect from the idea that it takes time to get to know someone. Like you're supposed to just get to know them like in, an hour or one visit. 2 visits, you think you know the person, you think you know enough to know whether you know them or not. Yes, I've spent a total of, 12 hours with you, and now I know you. That's a concept of the internet where, everything has got to be able to be reduced down to a Twitter. And by the way, if you're wondering how Donald Trump got so far, that's how. Now, some would say that's how Bernie Sanders got that far. And I would say, well, okay, on some level, right? No one's really prying too deeply into the nature of of the things that he's saying, and I do owe everyone a correction. That the City University of New York is mentioned in response to Bernie Sanders promising free public higher education was free if you qualified, if you had the grade point average to get in. If you didn't have the grade point average, you would have to work, get the grade point average, then you could get the scholarship. I, by the way, would part ways with Bernie Sanders on the free public higher education for all. I would say free public higher education if you academically deserve to get there. If you earned the merit, shown what you're capable of, sure, free. If not, pay. All right, that's a side point, and in many ways perfectly irrelevant to what we're talking about, but I did owe you a correction. So we might ask ourselves now how we are going to seek identity. There's a little short segment of Marshall McLuhan speaking in the 1960s. It was made into art, so there's some background music, but you can still hear what he's saying. And someone called him out on the thing, how we seek identity through violence. And I'm saying that we hunger for identity and therefore hunger for violence in the media to feed our lacking sense of identity and our lacking sense of sexual identity. And here's what McLuhan said when asked about this relationship between violence and identity.
The alternative to violence is dialogue, which is a kind of encounter interface with other people and situations. But yes, we live in a world in which we have so much power. In the old days, you could pull a trigger on a revolver and hurt people. But today, when you trigger these vast media that we use, you are manipulating entire populations. And the kinds of violence that we can now exert collectively are such as to require the situation to cool, to write down, cool, cool, cool. And we have, by means of the overkill, we have created a kind of universal peace in the world. The means of destruction are so vast at our command that war becomes unthinkable. So, in the same way, people are cooled off by media and by situations which require dialogue rather than just self-expression. Violence is a kind of self-expression, and so that the quest for identity, the person who is struggling to find out who am I, by all sorts of maladjustments, all sorts of quarrels, all sorts of encounters, such a person is a social nuisance, of course. But the quest for identity goes along with this bumping into other people in order to find out who am I, how much power can I exert, how much identity can I discover that I possess by simply banging into other people. And so that's what I had in mind when I said that the quest for identity is always a violent quest. It's a series of adventures and encounters that create all sorts of disturbance. I suppose, I don't think you have to go very far in literature for examples of it. I suppose Don Quixote is a great popular hero, and Flash Gordon, and Superman. But we're now beginning to get I'm thinking now of this new show, the Star War, that is the new Hollywood thing, that is based on Flash Gordon comics. The bionic man, bionic woman, these are vicarious forms of violence in which young people are trying to discover, who am I? I once asked to my granddaughter, one of our granddaughters, who was then 6, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said instantly, bionic woman. This is a kind of violence that permits one to discover who you are. I was using violence in a rather large sense of simply encounter, abrasive encounters. any kind of sport is a dramatization of the typical and accepted forms of violence in the business community. And so you can learn an enormous amount about the business community by studying the rules and procedures in cricket or baseball or golf, as far as that goes. All these games are huge ways of discovering, dramatizing what the society you are in is all about. By the way, without an audience, these games would have no meaning at all. They have to be played in front of a public in order to acquire their meaning. A baseball game without an audience would be a rehearsal only, a practice. The game requires a public, and the public has to resemble a whole cross-section of the community. I'm very interested in games as dramatizings of violent behavior under control.
Okay, that was from the late 1960s. Notice that he said not that war doesn't happen, but that it is unthinkable. We can't think about it. It's too brutal to think about, and too brutal for television. Instead, we get these little miniature wars, such as we're having in Orlando. And by universal peace, I don't think he's saying that there's not violence. He was speaking at the very height of the Vietnam War. I think what he's saying is that the violence is made to be vicarious, and that people basically are being made more timid by these experiences because they're getting the violence in a vicarious form. Anyway, this is all something to think about it in a different way. I am aware that there are a lot of problems that are surfacing with the whole scenario in Orlando, by which I mean I'm not pleased at the association of this guy Omar, with how many previous interviews with the FBI. My FBI source says that it is fairly typical that someone on this level would fall through the cracks because of rules of when the preliminary investigation has to end and when the field investigation can begin. There are rules. He's a little bit right-leaning. He called them PC rules that say that you can't pry in too deeply. But still, I'm not thrilled about his having been known by the FBI. You could argue both sides of that. And I'm not thrilled by what appears to be crisis actors. I don't know if this is part of some kind of a grand setup where crisis actors are used, or whether it's just an effect of network executives feeling as if they need to have dramatic footage, and so they use actors to act shocked and grief-stricken and to be the people speaking on TV. I am aware of the problem you have when you have to fill 24 hours a day of news and things already happened. There really are not new developments. That's the problem. It's not a breaking story. The story's over. And so it might be that it's purely a factor of the media, and if all the world is a stage, and if this all is, in effect, a TV show, which it is to us. It is an internet story or a TV show to us. It's not a real thing to us. If you were there, it's a real thing. To everyone else, it is a figment. It's a fantasy. It's an imaginary thing. It's a rumor that we've heard about, despite the high-definition television sets. Of course, you put actors on TV. What else do you do? It's television. All right. Eager to hear your feedback. Please do write to me or add comments to Facebook or Planet Waves Net, Planet Waves FM. Don't forget to sign up for my class, The Astrology of Now, which will be Saturday at noon, where we together can talk about this and feel each other out and figure out where we are. Admittedly, working through the astral robot plane of the internet, but I'm going to do my best, as I do, to keep it real. Thank you for listening. Have a good night. Good to be with you. As always, I leave you in the capable hands of Jimmy B. Free. This is called Can You Come Out and Play? Can you?